Podcast number 3, and time to get down to business. I wanted to start taking a look at all the different genres of country music, but I didn't know where to start. Do I go with bluegrass, western swing, outlaw country, honky tonk, the Nashville sound, maybe southern rock? But then it hit me. There really is only one place to start. The place where country starts and finishes, no matter which genre or subgenre you listen to. Hank Williams. This one man has influenced and inspired more country music. Actually, no, scratch that. It's a disservice to his legacy to limit it. More music than any one person. And yet, I'm not such a fan. Yes, I know that's a bit of a contradiction, that I will sing the praises of a singer I'm not a big fan of, but that's a demonstration of how big an influence this man has on music. While I might not be a big fan of Hank Williams the singer, I love some of the songs, and most, if not all, of my favourite singers have been influenced by him. Even though I knew his influence was still strong, it surprised me just how strong. When I decided to do this podcast on Hank, I thought I'd put together a playlist of covers of his songs by other artists. The surprise was how easy it was. Not only was it no problem to find 10 covers of his songs, some of them have so many different versions. I could have put together a 10-song playlist of different versions of the same song. All of this from a man who died at 29 after only 6 years of recording, who throughout his career was a barely functioning alcoholic who never learned to read or write down the songs he released out into the world. But what songs they were. He died in 1953, but his songs are still being sung and recorded today. The list of people who've recorded his songs is extensive and covers the entire spectrum of music. Most of them icons in their own right, who have all sung the praises and influences of this one man. Obviously, his influence is most heard in country, so much so that some country artists have not just covered a song or two of his, but have actually dedicated an entire album to covers of his songs. Artists like George Jones, Glenn Campbell, Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash have all done full albums of his songs. It's not just country artists though. In 1995, English post-punk band The also released an album of Hank covers. That album, called Hanky Panky, is well worth checking out. And the list of singers who have covered his songs includes jazz singer Norah Jones, legendary rockers the Rolling Stones, the soulful Ray Charles, and timeless crooner Tony Bennett, who, in 1951, became the first singer to expose Hank Williams' music to a wider, non-country audience. He recorded Cold Cold Heart, taking it all the way to the top of the pop charts, and in the process started the modern stage of country music. So, who was this man who's left such a lasting legacy on modern music? Hank Williams was born in Alabama on the 17th of September 1923. He was born with spina bifida, which left him with crippling pain in his back, and trying to tame that pain is the reason he turned to drink and drugs in later life. Hank's only musical training was from a street blues musician named Rufus Payne, who taught Hank how to play guitar. He mightn't have had much training, but he had the talent. And by 1937, at the age of 14, he had his own show on a radio station, WSFA, performing on air twice a week in 15-minute slots. He used the money he earned from this to form the first version of his band, the Drifting Cowboys, and they started to tour central and southern Alabama. By 1939, Hank dropped out of school to focus on music full-time. The touring expanded now to western Georgia and the Florida Panhandle. Unfortunately though, the more extensive touring saw the first emergence of his alcohol problems. Then, with America's entry into World War II, things began to change. All of his band were drafted, but not Hank, who received a deferment after falling from a bull in a rodeo. His new bandmates were not impressed with his worsening alcohol problem, which was now leading to missed shows and erratic behaviour, leading eventually to him being dropped from his radio show. Now, working in a shipbuilding company while playing in bars for soldiers, he met Audrey Shepherd, the love of his life and the inspiration behind a lot of his music. The two married, and at first the union must have been good for Hank, because he got his radio show back and started writing more and more songs, becoming recognised as a songwriter. Around this time, he tried to up his profile by getting on the Grand Ole Opry. He was rejected though, but his fortunes turned upwards again soon after when he got signed as a songwriter for the newly formed Acuff Rose music publishing firm. This led to him being signed by the small record label Sterling Records, and two of the recordings he did for them gained the attention of MGM Records, who he subsequently signed with in 1947, and released his first big hit, Move It On Over. Now, living in Louisiana, he joined the Louisiana Hayride, a radio show with a much higher profile than his own, and was touring all over the southeast. When he released his version of Lovesick Blues, it became a massive country hit, staying at number 1 for 4 months and crossing over to mainstream audiences. This finally led to him getting a place in the Grand Ole Opry. He made his debut there on June the 11th, 1949, where he received an unprecedented 6 encores. Between then and his death in 1953, the hits just kept coming. Hank released 34 charting singles between that first release in 1947 and his death 6 years later. 8 of them went to number 1, 23 more getting into the top 10. While his music was conquering the world though, his life was falling apart. As 1952 went on, Audrey divorced him, the Grand Ole Opry dismissed him for habitual drunkenness and missing shows, and Fred Rose from a song publishing company stopped working with him. Despite attempts to dry out, the drink and drug habits were as bad as ever, and he also started to suffer heart problems. On Thursday, the 1st of January 1953, Hank Williams died in the back of a Cadillac while being driven to the last gig he would ever miss. That's the story of the man, but the real interest here is the music and the influence he left behind. It's still incredible to think that in such a short space of time he left such a mark on modern music. And don't forget, just a couple of years later rock and roll came along and totally changed the rulebook. A country singer who was only around for a few years should have been forgotten in the revolution, but instead it cemented his legacy because so many of those early rock and rollers took inspiration from him. You only have to listen to Moving On Over to hear the inspiration of some of those early rock and roll tracks, like Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock. Let's take a look now at the playlist I've put together. This is an unusual one in that while all the songs are country born, I've included a lot of the non-country versions to show just how wide his influence was. Up first, Norah Jones and Cold Cold Heart. Hank wrote the song in 1950. The inspiration is meant to be a visit to see his then wife Audrey in the hospital. Audrey was in hospital, suffering from an infection brought on by an abortion she had carried out at their home. Hank knew nothing about either the pregnancy or abortion. Audrey refused Hank's affection, blaming him for the state she was in, and sent him home. Hank stated that Audrey had a cold, cold heart, and he took that inspiration and wrote down his pain. He recorded it in 1951, and it was released as a B-side to another song, Dear John. Dear John peaked at 8, but Cold Cold Heart received enough attention to take it all the way to number 1. Tony Bennett recorded the song the same year. Bennett's version was an even bigger hit. The jazzy version I've included here is from Norah's 2002 album, Come Away With Me. Then we have Hey Good Lookin. Hank reworked the original from a Cole Porter song. He supposedly wrote it for little Jimmy Dickens, but kept it for himself, joking with Jimmy, "It's too good for you." The version I've gone for is by the Mavericks, a great upbeat version from their second album, From Hell to Paradise. Next up, Honky Tonk Blues. Seemingly, Hank had a hard time getting this one right and had to record it several times before he got it right. It was worth the effort though, taking him to number 2 in the charts. The cover I'm going to put on is by the Pirates of the Mississippi. It was their debut single and, to my ears, owes as much to Huey Lewis's take on the song as Hank's original. Now we go with Jambalaya, which I know best as a Carpenter song who recorded it in 1973. Hank's version was released in 1952 and hit the top of the charts. It's a Cajun-inspired song, jambalaya being a Cajun food dish. This is one of Hank's most covered songs, having been recorded in 9 different languages and by big names such as Jerry Lee Lewis, George Jones, Elvis, Emmylou Harris, Van Morrison and Harry Connick Jr. Probably my favourite Hank Williams song is Let's Turn Back the Years. It was recorded when Hank's professional life was going strong, but his personal life was falling apart. He couldn't be stopped in the charts, even with his drinking being out of control at this stage, but his marriage to Audrey had fallen apart, and this song sounds like his last plea to Audrey before she divorced him. Again, it seems she was his inspiration in the wrong way. The version I love is by Waylon Jennings, which comes from his 1975 album, Dreaming My Dreams. Moving away from the country covers again, with a pure rock and roll version of Hank's first big hit, Moving On Over. Even Hank's version is more blues than country and shows some of the feel that would grow into rock and roll. The version I'm including here was the title track of George Thorogood and the Destroyers' 1978 album and shows just how much early rock and roll owes to Hank. Back to the slow songs with Your Cheating Heart. This was one of the last songs Hank recorded, and it was released in the weeks after his death, unsurprisingly going to number 1. It has been called the unofficial anthem of country music and one of the greatest country standards of all time. Ray Charles released his version in 1962, hitting the charts on both sides of the world with it, and that's the one I'm including here. Now we come to what, for me anyway, is the most surprising take on a Hank Williams song. I Saw the Light by Da Da. It's a gospel song which Hank recorded with MGM during the same session that produced Moving On Over. It was not a commercial success when released, but has gone on to become both a country and gospel standard. Da Da did the song in 1994 as part of a tribute album to Hank, and is as far away from that gospel sound of the original as you can get. Almost done now with You Win Again, this version being done by the Rolling Stones. Like most of Hank's sad songs, this has to have been about his ex-wife Audrey. He recorded it the day after their divorce was finalised. The Stones version comes from a 2011 reissue of their Some Girls album, which was originally out in 1978. What amazes me about the Stones take is how country this version is.